I think there was a healthy amount of cynicism on both of our ends, on many of the patrons' ends. Even my cynical self watching it play out, I was like, wow, white people, y'all really gonna prove us right. Trifling. And they sure did. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our finale of this season of Media Rundown. I don't know. Oh, no. I feel like you gotta laugh to keep from crying.
You crying? Yeah.
We're gonna talk about the election results. We're gonna talk about the polls because I think it's interesting. People's reaction to the polls, I think, is interesting. So I pulled up last election's data.
I'm still sad at my core,
and I think that's valid because it's about to, like, without being hyperbolic.
I feel like I was lied to.
I think that social media wanted to paint a picture of optimism at the cost of everyone else and did not want to listen to the realists that were like, are we talking about the same set of white people? And I think that's propped people up for an even bigger disappointment.
Because in the live earlier, I was talking about how, and I put a TikTok video up about how, like, I got by the TikTok algorithm. But also when I realized when I was talking about it, I wasn't just following TikTok. I was like reading. I read Heather Cox Richardson. I subscribed to the New York Times. I was getting Nathan Cohn's The Tilt. He was though constantly saying that it looks like we're going to have a Republican reemergence, that the Republicans are really gaining strength. His newsletter was it, but then everyone else was like poignantly countering Nate Silver of 538. And even like the way, like, just different outfits were talking about like early voting and the numbers to like get to the end, and we have 10 million less votes than 2020.
Yeah. And yeah. Well, before we get into it, let's put our agenda on the screen. So this is our loose agenda. The results, the order of blame, because I do think that it does make people feel better to find out like where to point the finger. So this was my suggested order of blame, which was to start with Joseph, then white people, because white women telling everyone they understood the assignment when deeply, in fact, they were not going to ever find the assignment. And then Latinidad, which I think has caught more people off guard unless you're from South Florida or from Texas. Because I find all of the people from South Florida and Texas being like, yeah, we've been told y'all that, and then deregulation and what that's going to mean. And then, all the things the Democratic Party is going to need to change to embrace seriousness. And then a little bit of hopefulness with down ballot and 2026 midterm. We would have to start building that out. I think people can be sad for the rest of the month.
Has the House been called?
When I checked at 6, no. Let me check again really quick and googly.
New York Times is saying 187 to 204.
218 gets you the majority.
This is so sad.
Yeah. Oh, where'd you go? Sorry, girl. Hold on.
How'd you kicking me off?
Sorry. Because to know something and then to watch it is still like, but why?
What?
My spirit is
annoyed.
We are going to have to do a lot of on the ground coalition building. So I'll be outside. Y'all probably see me knocking on your door. Say hi. But we can get into the data. We had this conversation since we've been running this series this whole time. We had this conversation, I think, last month about the white women vote and whether or not white women would be so moved by their rights getting taken away to actually vote for Kamala, and the answer was no. And when I said they are unbothered by this, people, you want to assume the best in people, that you could push them into things. Certain people will vote against themselves at all costs because they don't care. They think they're the exception to the rule. The same can be said for like Latinidad at large, which we can get into that. But I think before we get into those demographics, we do have to look into the data about the white men, because the white men, particularly the non-college educated white men, that is a growing block of people that I don't think our society knows what to do with. How do you have white men that do not have college degrees are making less money and they're voting for a billionaire? We're gonna all have to figure that out and get forced into figuring that out.
Social media is the problem. They're on their phones just like us.
And I have some stats for that too. So let me pull this back up and let's get into this. This is where it ended, and I think a lot of people were surprised by this that he won the popular vote and then also won the electoral college. So
I think I'm not surprised he won the electoral college. I'm surprised he won the electoral vote. And this is different from 2016 because people didn't know who Trump was going to be as a politician. We know, and I would like to say, before we get into the data, you make me big again. I got a point.
Yeah. And you're big.
COVID. I feel like genuinely people do not remember Trump's presidency because COVID gave people amnesia. I think, do I remember going from 33 to 37? No.
I think there's a point in that.
A lot of people don't remember.
Yeah. Because of what survival.
They don't remember, and so they don't know what to actually attribute to Trump. And then what to actually attribute to this. So I think it's COVID. And I also think the Biden administration, from this COVID push out, from the COVID rollout, from the vaccine mandate, continually had a communications problem.
Mm-hmm. And I think him not receiving consequences for January 6th and him not outrightly being called out on the insurrection that he literally started and stood there in Washington until years later, white people have downplayed the entire thing. Whereas most of us remember, I remember being at work being like, are these people scaling the building? They had a noose in the middle of the
It was a coup. Like, I don't think Americans we don't understand warfare. We talk a lot about revolutions, and we talk a lot about I think even the way we talk about it and how January 6th lives in our memories, it doesn't really speak to what happened. Like, people lost their lives that day.
Yeah, the seriousness of it.
Absolutely. And then we'll get to Joe Biden, but Joe Biden being resistive to the media during his presidency also aids in people not knowing what to attribute to Trump and what to attribute to Biden. And the disinformation machine has worked really well, particularly for white college, non-college educated, white working class men. Because where are they getting their media from? They're not watching 2020. They're not reading the local newspaper.
From podcasts. And I have a stat
Joe Rogan.
From Joe Rogan that apparently Trump, let me not misquote the actual, we're going to jump around with the stats, but let me put it on the screen because I was so surprised that it was this stark, really quick. Speaking of where white men without college degrees, particularly because they voted for Trump at 69%, Trump went on at least 20 podcasts compared to Harris's 4. So those 20 podcasts included Joe Rogan, Logan Paul, people that I would say like mainstream media is like, oh, these are fools, whatever. But that's where they're getting their news from. And that is what has essentially allowed them to deify this person who doesn't give a damn about them either. I think people also don't want to think about COVID. So it's the fact that they've forgotten because it's a blur, but also the discomfort, reckoning with all that. Some people intentionally don't want to think about it. And so it becomes like, oh, well, what really happened versus
and now. It's super easy for Ben Shapiro and for Logan Paul and Joe Rogan and Aiden Ross and all these various white men to rewrite history because these are not people who read books. They do not read their paper. And then we have a social media algorithm that will just constantly reinforce what they're hearing on these podcasts.
One of the things that's also really important is, of course, not just the presidential race, but the thing that will impact people very swiftly and a lot faster than the effects of the presidential race, which is our legislature. So the House results are not in, but the Senate results are in. And the GOP.
Is what's most depressing to me.
Yeah, this is what troubles me.
This is a nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
The thing is to have like a more radical imagination around what this signifies. I do not think people are aptly prepared for violence to be effective at this juncture. We don't have communities of care. We don't have... When we go without,
people rightfully don't want to be hyperbolic, but people also like, how do we relay the seriousness of the situation?
So this means Mitch McConnell is very giddy and very happy because
what's left
they're going to steamroll. So we're already a conservative court. Supreme Court. We're going to remain a conservative Supreme Court. They are going to continue changing over the district courts to conservatism, because all courts across the state that are appointed on the federal level are all lifetime positions.
Correct. Yes.
So from the Supreme Court to the Court of Appeals to district courts, those are all lifetime appointments, and our entire judicial system is going to be transformed into ultra conservative.
Yes. And we have the federal branch of the court system, then you have the state branch of the court system. If you live in a red state, your state branch is likely already conservative to begin with.
Well, ours just became.
Yes.
We had a Democrat majority and we lost it, and it's now 6-1 Republicans.
It also, to point out one thing that I thought was really interesting on the New York ballot, at least, and I'm sure it's similar in other places because we talked about this last time, a lot of judges, because state courts have elected judges, they're running unopposed. So on the New York ballot, for example, there was, I think our civil court, there were 7 openings and there were 7 people running. So essentially all of them got a seat. So for us to change these things, because some of them are up in like midterm, some of them will be in like the next 4 years, other people have to actually challenge these people.
But like on a policy level about how this impacts you on a state and your local life, it's going to be incredibly difficult for any government in the United States to pass progressive law that sticks, because the Republicans have an entire apparatus to quickly file lawsuits against any state that implements, so like a permanent abortion ban, to challenge how a state tries to skirt around the permanent abortion ban, they'll sue. And when you have a conservative court,
and you have people like Edward Blum who have refined how to push lawsuits through the court system to figure out like, okay, you do a level of forum shopping. So you're picking out like, okay, which judge is sympathetic to my specific plight. They've already placed the judges there, which has created more of the issue. Also, one of the things that Trump kept saying was, oh, the election is rigged. He started planting the seeds of doubt just in case he lost. And the reason why he did that on the electoral lawsuit side, the Republican Party has already sued so much. They've changed how votes are counted. They've put in all these laws to catch like these phantom people that don't exist, that are casting illegal ballots that don't exist. And so we already have laws in place that are much more restrictive than they need to be. In New York, you don't technically need your ID to vote. As long as your name is in the system and you're registered, that's fine. In other states like Alabama, you have to have your ID. You have to have all these other things, and they are going to essentially try to push that probably into more states as well, just to make it harder for more people to vote. Because the more apathetic people are, the easier it is for Republicans because they have a battery already in their back.
My thinking, though, is this could possibly be a short and painful period.
I think with enough organizing in 2 years, we can turn it around. I would say that hopefulness.
We can organize out our asses. Well, we're not a political party. You know what I mean? Yeah. Are the Democrats going to have the balls to get in? They're going to have to take hard line.
And they're not going to. So I think maybe
they're going to keep pandering to this elusive white man in middle, rather than get those 10 million votes they lost, rather than go after the other 57% of Americans who are eligible to vote and do not vote.
Mm-hmm. Rather than actually give hopefulness to other people to make them get out of their bed, which would lead to a broader conversation of the two-party system was on its way to cracking. And maybe this has cracked it. So we need more parties.
But we thought it was going to be the end of the Republican Party because they become a cult of personality with Trump. And instead, it's like, can the Democrats come back from this? But
to the second thing in line for the blame, which is after not placing the appropriate consequences on Trump when he caused insurrection, is Joseph Robinette Biden. Yeah. Can we come back from the fact that we allowed an 80-year-old man?
We should have never moved closer to the center.
We should have never been on the primary ballot.
We moved further center right. And like the writing is on the wall, right? When you look at the history of American presidents, and we want to play this game of like American history politics at the electoral level, Democrats have been doing bad since JFK. And as soon as they allowed a Nixon to come in and that silent majority proposal to work, rather than taking a hard line in the opposite direction, Democrats have been trying to meet Republicans in the middle in order to get those working class voters back.
Which you can't get working class voters back with policies that do not help them. Which Bernie Sanders wrote something out similar to that. And yes, the man does have some flaws. However, he's pretty consistent with that set of rhetoric, and that is correct.
Joe Biden should have never been president.
I mean, yes, I agree. But
you go back to 2020, and then for it to be Clyburn to be the one that like appoints Biden as who is going to be the Democrat nominee for president in 2020 was insane. I really resent even more now being told that Biden was the only one who could win against Trump in 2020. These past two elections, we're being told who needs to be the primary and who we owe loyalty to this person. It's been much more about loyalty and a lot less about whose policy. Like, oh, we couldn't have Elizabeth Warren because nobody's going to elect a woman, but then we get a black woman in 2024. They beat back Bernie twice. They really have not allowed people to engage at the primary level, honestly, with who the nominees are. Mm-hmm. We have been sold on this idea of loyalty.
Mm-hmm. Which that is breeding more apathy in Democrats and would-be Democrats. Because all the flaws that the Republican Party has, they allowed Donald Trump to run in the primary. People ran against him. What's his name? DeSantis, trifling self from Florida. Ted Cruz ran against Jeb Bush. My one happiness was Jeb Bush losing as a child from Florida in the FCAT. I was like, a stupider man beat you, and good for you. Because now
Republicans really got to choose.
They got to choose who they wanted.
Trump being president was their choice.
That's their guy.
And honestly, it's really more about Joe Biden waiting until, 6 weeks before the DNC.
3 months?
He should have never gone for a second term.
Let me put this one back on the screen. Now that Joseph has been berated, and he will not care about any consequences to himself, the amount of white men that voted for Trump, I would say in general is unsurprising, but because they think they're getting something, even though most of them do not have the actual access to wealth to get anything. But a lot of people have been focusing on, this is such a large amount of white men without college degrees voting for Trump, which is 69%, in which we talked about a little bit. I just wanted to pull up the stats so people could see it. This is from NBC News. These are the exit polls. It does go also hand in hand into what we've been seeing, which is Republicans attacking higher education and them trying to attack the idea that, college is helpful to people, them trying to say, oh, well, you're not learning anything in college, this, that, and the next. I think college is too expensive. I think it should be affordable, but it's definitely a helpful period of time that if you want to go, people should have access to. And it's very easy to see like the correlation of them not wanting people to go to college and then them also bamboozling a whole demographic of young men.
My concern, though, is that this is only going to be 4 years. I don't even think these white men, because of the whole media apparatus that surrounds them, are ever going to know that it's Trump causing their life to suck more. I don't think even if their life gets extensively worse, they're still going to,
Yeah. I don't think people will see, unfortunately, the effects of this presidency for at least a decade, if not two, depending on how effective he is in the first 2 years, depending on how much deregulation he can push through and how many district and appellate court judges he can put in the federal. And then if Sotomayor or Keegan resign,
they can't go nowhere. They know that. I'm sure they cried in the bed last night too. Because they both are health-wise not doing their best.
Which is very unfortunate, because we should have term limits. So that way that is not an issue. And to add on to people who decided they too would vote against their interests again, I found a wild statement that at first even my cynical self didn't want to believe. And then I fact checked it and I was like, oh, wait, this is correct, which was Donald Trump won the majority of white women voters for the third straight time. The third is what threw me off. I knew when it came to Hillary, they did not choose Hillary Clinton. I did not remember, and honestly, maybe I just didn't even look at it, that also when it came to the 2020 election, Joe Biden versus Trump, white women also, the majority of them voted for Trump in the 2020 election. And for the third time in a row, I'm not going to call people out their name. They chose to do the same thing again. Sadly,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Sadly, I knew they were going to do that.
I think white women have a similar media apparatus that makes it extraordinarily easy to vilify any other woman to white women. Because I think they were being fed messaging that constantly said that Kamala Harris was evil, was not a child of God, and she was against the family.
I think it's more sinister than that, because this is their 2016 gap. So white women, 47% voted for Trump, 45% voted for Hillary. And then you have this year, you have white women, it's grown. 53% voted for Trump versus the 45% of white women that voted for Harris, with negligible amounts of third party. We didn't talk about it earlier, but to be stated now, the third party amounts are very negligible. Yeah. The people yelling at the third party voters, find somebody else to yell at, because it's not sensible to yell at them. Let the people do what they want and exercise their conscience, because it didn't have any effect on anything. With this, I think white women largely, and I'm of the belief, with you kindly pointing me in the direction of Tracy McMillan Cottom's Thick and knowing your whites. White women are a set of whites that I know. And white women believe in their deepest core of spirit that they are the exception to any rule. That white men are awful to them, but they can rise above.
They are the ultimate victim as well. Yeah.
Always. So they will vote for Trump and still be like, yeah, maybe he'll ban abortion, but somehow I'm going to get B1. And that's what they chose to do. In droves, 53%.
I think something the data is hiding is that Black women are being radicalized as well. We when we do show out, we're pretty consistent, but a lot of Black women are checking out.
I think that's valid. I have, let me see, do we have it here? 91% of Black women that voted for Harris, and 7% voted for Trump. But the stats that I didn't pull, to your point, are, I think it's about 10 million Democrats, around that number, that did not vote. And what percentages of that are Black people?
Rather than yelling at third-party voters, why were we not engaging kindly with disaffected voters?
And I think that would have made more sense. I think that was a strategy.
But we were too busy telling people that Palestine was a single ticket issue. We were too busy telling people that we need to focus on economics and not gender reaffirming care, not gay or trans rights, not disability. We are too busy telling disenfranchised groups within our communities that their concerns don't matter, and we distill a lot of people from engaging in voting.
Yep. And I think the other part of not checking in with us, because we are, as Black women, disenfranchised, and the disenfranchised among us, was also the opposite coin of that, was then the people that wanted to engage, particularly the Black vote. The pathway was like, we're just going to smack you with it. We're going to smack you, and we're going to tell you your ancestors died, so you better get your ass in line. And that's not going to work.
And I think they're going to have to start failing. And they're going to have to start reflecting at least an attempt for policies down ballot that they can directly speak to as Democrat policies that would be positive influences on people's lives.
And I think also we deserve something. Black women have overwhelmingly shown, 92% is the highest percentage of anybody, that we are willing to put aside our needs for the greater good over and over again. At a certain point, people are rightfully like, why? And to be very, very honest, the blame is a mix of Donald Trump himself, obviously, Joseph Robinette Biden, and white people. It's the three of them. But the rest of us also are deserving of seeing ourselves represented in the policies that are passed. Because nothing proposed, I was like, okay. They didn't even talk about student loans. They're like, yeah, we've let that go. We're moving on from that. I'm like, Black women are the largest affected demographic of student loans. We owe the most money. People love to tout the statistic because we're very proud of it, that Black women now are the most educated demographic. And with that, we are the most debt-laden demographic. 6 figures of debt. Doing the right thing to get what? Stress. Time for them.
No one hates new immigrants more than less new immigrants. You know what? Somebody was doing, Tony Vara, who I like on TikTok, was saying that when everyone thinks of conservative Latinos, they think of Cubans. But he's like, you need to meet Venezuelans and El Salvadorians that make over $35K a year. He's like, middle class Latinos are well represented across the diaspora as conservatives. And, if you read anything on the history of the anti-abortion movement, it talks about how the Latino movement, because of Catholicism, is very fertile ground for a conservative anti-abortion movement to flourish. It's just that whiteness continually gets in the way. But some communities have been able to come over here and be absorbed into whiteness.
So they think.
Yeah.
So they think. And I think Miami Cubans are the number one example of this. And I think it's their holistically a large percentage of Hispanics are Catholic. So you have the Catholic angle with their anti-abortion views. Also, Latinidad as an ethnicity is made up of 3 different races. You have white Latinos, you have Afro Latinos, you have Black Latinos, and then you have like mestizajes, and then you also have indigenous Latinos, which they never want to mention that. And the mestizajes being as in like mixed race, depending on where your phenotype lands, depends on how you identify. And I saw somebody put the idea out today, which was we need to stop lumping Hispanic/Latino as an ethnicity and instead call it what it is, which is a shared language group. And I thought that was really interesting because that makes sense. Because, for example, white Cubans, a lot of them in Miami are descended from land-owning Cubans in Cuba who Fidel Castro pushed out to then redistribute the land. We get into a long argument about how people feel about that redistribution, but some of them do come from plantation-owning Spaniard descendants. And they will tell you if you ask them. And so they feel in their spirit, and they're not technically wrong, that they are white. What they don't want to ever realize is they are white and Hispanic here. And they will loudly tell you, and they have been all over Instagram today, oh, good, I voted for Trump, go deport the rest of them. Not realizing that, immigration is INS. INS under Trump will not care if you have paperwork or don't have paperwork. And the numbers are what have really shocked people. But I want to go back to 2016 because it shouldn't be so shocking. And by people, I mean people outside of South Florida and people outside of Texas. So in 2016, Hispanic men, 28% voted for Trump. And mind you, in 2016, he very clearly called Mexicans, specifically, he called them rapists, called them murderers, called them all these awful things. The Hispanic vote that largely voted for him, some of them were Mexican American. And then you have 28% of Hispanic women also voting for Trump. And that is compared to now we have, this is the religion one, because the religion does play a factor to your point.
He made huge inroads with the Latino community.
He did. Despite calling Puerto Rico a pile of garbage, he won the Latino men vote 55%. So the majority of Latino men voted for Trump. That is inclusive because Cubans are a small, technically they're a small demographic in the Latino population. They're just very loud. The largest demographic of Latinos in the United States is Mexican Americans. So 55% voted for Trump. And then Latinas, it's funny to me to see it say Latino women. I was like, that's not correct. 38% voted for Trump. He didn't even have any messaging for Latinas for them to be like, yes. The average racist American person is like, well, actually, you're the fool for voting for him because I would like all of you gone. I would say the only demographic from Latinidad that I think I haven't seen the country by country breakdown, that I think in the United States, because Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico are not allowed to vote in the federal election. I don't believe Puerto Ricans that have full U.S. citizenship, I don't think they overwhelmingly voted for Trump. Other than that, it's probably every other demographic.
I also think Caribbean, because you all saw them other racist people. I know he said nasty things about the Haitians, but
so I wanted to pull it up. I'm gonna find it and pull it up. There's a stat, because my friends and I were talking about it in our group chat, and I would say I was actually flabbergasted. And the more we talked about it, I was like, oh, I would like to see the country by country breakdown. In 2016, 30% out of all the Black men that voted for Trump, they did the data. 30% of foreign-born Black men, so technically the first-generation immigrant, voted for Trump. And why is it that 30% of that's a high percentage of foreign-born Black men?
I would love to see a breakdown of countries.
This is where the stats that I was citing are from. Also, this is a very petty, very diaspora-esque.
This happened the other day. Oh, but I didn't charge them, I guess.
Can you hear? I can hear you.
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah, but to the point that I was trying to say about like people that come from communities where they've been shamed for having, indigenous spiritual practices and wanting to distance themselves from it, are often primed for a certain type of religion that doesn't really travel as far in the African American community. It is a particular type of like charismatic preaching that fosters this idea of capitalism really being, capitalism is definitely in the African American church, but like this idea of prosperity, and if you just pray it away and you give us these large sums of money, things will come to you. And then are also able to say, if you vote for this type of person or you think this type of way, and they often take very hard lines with abortion in ways that don't, like, abortion in the Black church is not talked about very directly.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who have not wrapped their heads around people's right to reproductive care just kind of skirt around the topic.
And I think the Dems could have avoided this entire kerfuffle by codifying it into a federal law when they had the chance. But here we are. Here we are. I think it is interesting because back to like there's a stat in here about religion, and to your point about how religion is basically it's actually essentially forcing people to be single issue voters, which everyone else got accused of. Oh, this is not the right thing. Hold on.
And religion in America is so much less about theology and much more about where can I find a pastor who's going to preach things that make me feel good. And I think people are, when it comes to like voting conservatively, you're not voting. Like, why do you believe that your theology should become legislation? Do they understand that they are voting to control other people?
I think they know that. I think it is about control, not about religion. Because to be honest,